All right, welcome everyone to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something pretty big, I think even revolutionary, the idea of social business.
It's kind of a wild concept when you first hear it, right?
Mhm.
Using the power of capitalism, not just for profits, but as the main engine for solving like huge global problems, social, economic, environmental, you name it.
Exactly. And to help us unpack this whole thing, we're turning to a true pioneer in this field.
Yep, we're going deep into the ideas of Muhammad Yunus. Specifically, his book, Building Social Business. I think it's going to be a good one.
It's definitely a must-read for anyone, really anyone who's, interested in understanding how we can use business to tackle these huge challenges we're all facing.
Totally. And especially for those of you who, like to cut to the chase, get to those aha moments without having to wade through a ton of jargon or anything like that. This is like a crash course in the core ideas and real-world examples of social business, all based on Yunus's incredible work.
It is. So before we get lost in the details, what are we really trying to get out of this deep dive? What's the mission here?
Basically, I think there are three big things we want to accomplish. First, we got to get a clear definition, right? What exactly is social business? Then we need to understand how it's different. How does it compare to like traditional businesses or even to things like CSR initiatives or nonprofits?
And then, of course, see it in action. We've got to look at real-world examples, see how this whole thing actually plays out.
Exactly. So I guess the first question is, where did this whole idea of social business even come from? Like what sparked it?
Yeah, great question. And the answer is really fascinating. Eunice's background is actually in economics. He was a professor, right? And it was his experience during a really horrific famine in Bangladesh back in the early 70s that kind of turned everything upside down for him.
Yeah, he talks about this moment of like profound dissonance. He's sitting in his university office surrounded by these, elegant economic theories. But right outside his window, there's this devastating famine unfolding,
Right.
crushing hunger and poverty, and these traditional economic concepts just felt totally empty and inadequate.
Yeah, that's got to be a pretty jarring realization. Like all this theory, but it doesn't address the reality staring you in the face.
Totally. And it spurred him to action. At first, his goal was pretty simple, like almost shockingly simple.
What do you mean?
Well, he just decided, okay, I need to find a way to be useful to at least one person every single day. That's it. That was his starting point. And from that, incredibly grounded, human-centered approach, this whole thing started to grow.
And that ultimately led to him founding the Grameen Bank, right? Which has kind of become a cornerstone of the whole social business movement.
Absolutely. The Green Bank really came about because of this huge gap in the existing banking system. Traditional banks just flat out refused to lend money to the poor. They saw them as too risky.
Yeah, which, when you think about it, further perpetuates the cycle of poverty, right?
Exactly. And Yunus was just blown away by this. He thought it was so unjust. So after hitting all these roadblocks, trying to get loans for the poor through traditional banks, he just decided to create his own bank. That's how Grameen Bank, which basically means village bank, was born.
And the idea, the core of it was that, poor people are actually creditworthy, that they can and will repay their loans.
Right, and that was a radical idea at the time. And you know what? It worked. Grameen Bank's success completely shattered that old assumption, proving that you can lend to the poorest people and make a profit doing it.
And it's had an incredible impact, right? Touching the lives of millions.
Totally. Grameen Bank today serves literally millions of borrowers across Bangladesh. And there's one stat about the borrowers that I always find so striking.
Yeah, I think I know what you're going to say.
A whopping 97% of Grameen's borrowers are women.
I mean, it's not just an accident, is it?
No, not at all. There was a conscious decision early on to prioritize lending to women. Part of it was to counter the, pretty blatant discrimination women faced when trying to access loans from conventional banks. But more importantly, they saw that when women had access to income, it just had a ripple effect on their families, their kids especially. When mothers had financial resources, it made a huge difference for their children's well-being.
Right, empowering women is a key strategy, I guess you could even say, for tackling poverty at a community level. And this whole experience with Grameen Bank really solidified Yunus's view on, the root cause of poverty, right?
It did. It really solidified his belief that poverty is not created by poor people. He sees it as a systemic issue. It's the systems we've built, the institutions that have historically excluded a vast majority of people that are to blame. Grameen Bank was living proof that, lending to the poor isn't just some charitable act. It can be a sustainable and profitable business model.
And that kind of leads to this, I don't know, this almost revolutionary idea about credit.
Yeah, Yunus argues that credit shouldn't be seen as some, like, privilege reserved for the wealthy or the, quote-unquote credit worthy. It
Huh.
should be a basic human right.
Mhm.
Like, access to financial services is essential for people to empower themselves, to lift themselves out of poverty.
It's a big shift in how we view something that, a lot of people probably take for granted. Now, all this experience really shaped his thinking. But he also takes aim at some of the foundational assumptions of traditional economics, especially when it comes to what motivates us as human beings. He doesn't really buy the whole humans are driven purely by self-interest thing, does he?
No, he doesn't. He points to the, undeniable fact that people are also motivated by selflessness. I mean, think about all the charitable giving that happens around the world. Sure, some of it might be influenced by tax breaks, but there's definitely a deep altruistic impulse driving a lot of it.
Right, people donate their time, their money to all sorts of causes. So where does he see the big problem with this narrow view of human motivation, this purely self-interested model?
Well, he argues that it's a fundamental flaw in our economic thinking. This distorted view of human nature, he says, is a fatal flaw, and he thinks it contributes to all sorts of crises that we're facing today.
Interesting. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. The problem is that our whole system, our laws, our education systems, everything is built on this idea that the only motivations worth caring about are the selfish ones.
Right. Maximize your own profit, look out for number one, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And this leads to a massive overinvestment in traditional for-profit businesses while neglecting other approaches. And it prevents us from really questioning some of the basic assumptions that might be causing the problems in the first place. Like, is this relentless pursuit of profit actually making things worse in some ways?
Right. So if this traditional economic model is so flawed, what's the alternative? How does he define social business?
So when he talks about social business, specifically type I social business, he's talking about businesses that are designed from the ground up to solve a social problem. And the key here is that nobody takes the profit personally. The profits stay within the business.
So it's like a business in that it operates sustainably, it brings in revenue, but that revenue is completely dedicated to its social mission.
Right. Owners can get their initial investment back, but beyond that, there's no personal financial gain. The driving force, the motivation, is the joy of making a difference.
Which is a pretty powerful motivator, I think, for a lot of people.
It can be. And the simple no-profit rule, it seems simple, but it really forces us to think differently. It challenges the assumption that the only way to do business is to maximize personal profit.
Okay, so we've got this idea of a business that's designed for good with no personal profit motive, but how is that different from a traditional charity or an NGO or even corporate social responsibility, CSR, which a lot of companies do these days?
Great question. Because it's really important to understand the distinctions here. Let's start with charities and NGOs. They do incredible work, obviously, but they rely on donations, which can be, well, it can be tough to sustain, especially long term.
Yeah, you're always at the mercy of donors and, whether or not they're feeling generous that year.
Exactly. Social businesses, on the other hand, are designed to be self-sustaining. The money keeps recycling within the business, which means it can potentially have a much bigger and longer-lasting impact than even the best-run charity.
Okay, so self-sufficiency is a big difference. What about cooperatives? They often have some kind of social aim, right?
They can, but the main difference is that co-ops are primarily focused on benefiting their members. They're owned by their members, and profits go back to those members, which isn't a bad thing, of course, but it's a different model than a social business, where the primary goal is to solve a specific social problem that affects a wider community.
So even if a co-op does some good in the world, that's kind of a secondary effect.
You could say that. Though Yunus does point out that if the members of a co-op are themselves poor people, then it could actually be considered a social business, because any profits would go back to the very people who need it most.
Right, that makes sense. Now, what about social marketing? It sounds kind of similar.
Yeah, the name can be confusing, but social marketing is more about using marketing techniques to promote, positive behavioral changes, like, campaigns to encourage people to get vaccinated or something like that. It doesn't necessarily involve building a whole business.
Okay, it's influencing behavior rather than directly tackling a problem through a business model. Now, CSR, that's something we hear a lot about. What sets social business apart from CSR?
This is a really key distinction. CSR, corporate social responsibility, is often kind of an add-on to a traditional for-profit business. Like a company might create a charity fund or, sponsor some events in the community. It's often about building a positive image.
Yeah, it can feel a little bit like, hey, look at us, we're doing good.
Exactly. And the problem is that when a company's primary goal is still to maximize profit, social concerns often end up taking a back seat. So, if there's a conflict between doing good and making money, the money usually wins. With social business, there's no such conflict. The social mission is always front and center.
And one last comparison. For-profit microcredit. Since Yunus himself is so well known for pioneering microcredit, where does social business fit in with that?
Well, microcredit itself isn't inherently a bad thing. The idea is to provide small loans to people who wouldn't normally qualify for traditional loans, helping them start small businesses and things like that.
Right. But didn't some microcredit institutions kind of go off track?
Yeah, that's exactly the problem. Some of them started charging really high interest rates, basically exploiting the very people they were supposed to be helping. Yunus is very critical of this, calling it loan sharking, basically. He saw it as a betrayal of the whole spirit of microcredit. Social business, with its strict no-profit rule, avoids this pitfall entirely.
That no-profit rule seems to be like the bedrock of the whole thing. Why is it so crucial?
It's really about keeping the focus where it needs to be. Yunus believes that even the smallest possibility of making a personal profit can, over time, corrupt the whole mission. It's like, if you let a little bit of greed in the door, it'll eventually take over the whole house.
Oh, I like that. It's like a weed that spreads.
Exactly. And he actually argues that this laser focus on profit, this obsession with maximizing personal wealth, is a big part of what's led to so many of the problems we're facing today.
So he's saying that, capitalism itself, the way it's practiced now, is actually contributing to things like poverty and inequality.
He is. He doesn't think capitalism is inherently evil, but he does believe it's led to some pretty serious problems. And he points to things like social safety nets as evidence. Like, why do so many countries have welfare programs and unemployment benefits? Because the free market alone doesn't take care of everyone. It leaves a lot of people behind.
Right. Okay, so we've got a pretty good handle on the definition and how it's different from other models, but what does it actually look like in practice? Yunus's book talks about all sorts of really cool examples, especially within the Grameen network. Can you walk us through some of those?
Yeah, there's some really great examples of how social business principles are being used to address all sorts of problems, and a lot of them start with Grameen itself. One of my favorites is Grameen Danone, the yogurt project.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that. It's a great example of how you can use a business model to tackle a specific social problem, right?
Exactly. In this case, the problem was malnutrition, particularly among children in Bangladesh. So they created this joint venture with Danone, the yogurt company, to produce this really affordable, nutritious yogurt called Shakti Doi. And just to be clear, this is a type I social business, so there's no personal profit involved. Any profits go right back into expanding the program and reaching more kids.
Right. It's all about sustainability and maximizing impact, not padding anyone's pockets. And I read that they had some challenges early on, didn't they?
They did. One of the biggest hurdles was distribution. Keeping yogurt cold in a place like rural Bangladesh is not easy. Their initial strategy focused on, small stores in and around Bogra, which is a city, but getting the yogurt out to the villages was a whole other ballgame.
So what did they do?
They had to get creative. They realized that one size doesn't fit all. They had to develop different systems for urban and rural areas, even different types of packaging. And in the villages, they started working with Grameen ladies. These are the women who've gotten loans from Grameen Bank. They basically became door-to-door yogurt salespeople. It was brilliant, actually. It not only brought the yogurt directly to the people who needed it most, but it also created new income opportunities for these women.
Win-win. That's a pretty common theme with Grameen, I think, finding ways to create multiple benefits with one initiative. And they've tackled other needs too, right? Like shoes.
Yes. Grameen Adidas is another fantastic example. Their goal was to create super affordable, high-quality shoes specifically for people in low-income communities.
Which is about more than just comfort, right?
Oh, absolutely. A lot of people in Bangladesh and other places walk around barefoot, which exposes them to all sorts of parasitic infections. So having a good pair of shoes can be a real game changer for their health. Adidas brought their, manufacturing know-how to the table, and Grameen helped with understanding the local context and figuring out the best distribution channels.
From yogurt to shoes, what about healthcare? They've done some stuff in that area, haven't they?
Yeah, big time. Grameen Healthcare is working on setting up all sorts of medical facilities as social businesses. One that I find particularly inspiring is a specialized unit for treating thalassemia.
Thalassemia.
It's a genetic blood disorder that's pretty common in Bangladesh.
Hmm.
It's really serious, especially for kids. And the treatments, like bone marrow transplants, are super expensive, often out of reach for most families. So Grameen Healthcare is building a facility to make these treatments more accessible and affordable. And to make sure they have enough doctors and nurses, they're even starting their own University of Health Sciences and Technology.
Wow, so they're really investing in building a whole healthcare ecosystem. It's amazing. And what about something as basic as clean water?
Yep, that's a huge issue, especially in Bangladesh, where arsenic contamination is a widespread problem.
Yeah, isn't arsenic naturally occurring in a lot of groundwater there?
It is. So Grameen partnered with Veolia, a French water company, to create Grameen Veolia Water. Their goal is to provide safe drinking water to communities affected by arsenic. And this wasn't an easy fix. It took a lot of innovation. They had to find ways to treat surface water instead of relying on the contaminated groundwater.
Interesting. So each of these social businesses is really tailored to the specific problem they're addressing, and sometimes they involve partnerships with, like, big established companies.
Right. And that's a really important aspect of the whole social business model. These collaborations can bring in much needed expertise, resources, and even technology. Another great example is BASF Grameen.
BASF, the chemical company.
Yep. They teamed up with Grameen to produce two really important things: chemically treated mosquito nets to prevent malaria, and those little micronutrient sachets that you can add to food to address malnutrition. And again, they rely heavily on the network of Grameen ladies to distribute these products, so it creates income opportunities as well as health benefits.
It's like that double benefit approach we were talking about earlier. Are there any other partnerships that stand out?
Oh yeah, tons. Grameen's also working with Pfizer and GE Healthcare on projects to improve healthcare delivery in village clinics, particularly focusing on maternal and child health. They're developing affordable, portable ultrasound technology that can be used in rural areas where access to sophisticated medical equipment is limited.
It's pretty incredible to see how many different social businesses Grameen has helped to launch, and in such diverse sectors. We've talked a lot about type I social businesses, the ones that are purely focused on solving a social problem with no personal profit whatsoever. But Yunus also talks about type 2 social businesses, right? What's the difference?
Right, so Type 2 social businesses are a little bit different in that they're specifically designed to benefit a defined group of poor people. It could be workers in a particular factory or their families or even an entire community.
Okay, so the goal is still to alleviate poverty, but it's targeted at a specific group.
Exactly. And the profits from the business are reinvested directly back into that group. So it's still no profit in terms of personal enrichment for the owners, but the benefits go directly to the people who need it most. A great example of this is the Otto Grameen textile company.
Tell me more about that.
It's a joint venture between Grameen and Otto, a German retail company. And any profits generated by the textile company go straight to the Otto Grameen Trust, which uses those funds to support the workers and their families.
So it's like a built-in social safety net for those workers. And Yunus also talks about initiatives aimed at protecting vulnerable workers, like migrant laborers, right?
He does. There's Grameen Employment Services, GES, which basically acts as a kind of ethical subcontractor for migrant workers. They work to protect the workers' rights, making sure they get fair wages, decent working conditions, and all that. They also provide training and support to help the workers enhance their skills and even learn new languages, which can really increase their earning potential.
Right. It's like taking a proactive approach to ensuring that the benefits of migration are actually shared with the workers, not just the employers. And this whole social business thing, it's not limited to Bangladesh, is it? Yunus talks about applying these principles in other parts of the world as well.
Yeah, there are all sorts of regional revitalization projects happening around the globe that are using these ideas. For example, in a region of Colombia called Caldas, they're using a portfolio of social businesses to try to revitalize the local economy.
And what about after the earthquake in Haiti back in 2010? Didn't they do something there?
Yeah, there was a big push to use social business to help with the recovery efforts there. They set up a special social business fund specifically for Haiti to support the creation of businesses in areas like housing, healthcare, agriculture, even just basic job creation. Because, after a disaster like that, it's not just about providing immediate aid, it's about building long-term resilience.
Right. Giving people the tools and the opportunities to rebuild their lives in a sustainable way. It's pretty inspiring to see how this model can be adapted to all sorts of different contexts. One more example I wanted to touch on is the collaboration between Cure2Children and Grameen Healthcare.
Oh, yeah, that one's incredible.
Mm.
So Cure2Children is an NGO founded by an Italian doctor, Lawrence Faulkner, and they specialize in treating thalassemia, that blood disorder we were talking about earlier. They partnered with Grameen Healthcare to provide advanced surgical treatments, specifically bone marrow transplants, to kids in Bangladesh.
Which are, I'm assuming, very expensive procedures.
They are. And the collaboration is all about making them affordable and accessible to families who would never be able to afford to travel to Europe or the US for treatment. And they're using like all this high-tech communication to allow doctors in Italy to share their expertise with doctors in Bangladesh. It's amazing.
It is. And wasn't there something unique about how they approached the whole thing, like some kind of open source aspect?
Right. Both Yunus and Dr. Faulkner were really adamant that this should be an open source project. They wanted to freely share their knowledge and their best practices with other doctors and organizations around the world, rather than keeping it all proprietary. The goal is to make these life-saving treatments available to as many children as possible.
It's like the opposite of a big pharma company hoarding its patents and secrets.
Exactly. It's about collaboration, sharing knowledge, and using that knowledge to empower others to do the same.
Okay, so let's say you're totally inspired by all of this and you want to start your own social business. What are the practical considerations? Like, what kind of legal structure should you use? Yeah, that's a big question. And Eunice has some pretty strong opinions about this, doesn't he?
He does. He's not a fan of the traditional nonprofit model for social businesses. He thinks that the lack of ownership inherent in a nonprofit can actually hinder its long-term sustainability and commitment. He's very clear that a social business is a business, even though its primary purpose is social good.
So he prefers a for-profit structure, but with that strict no personal profit rule in place. What about those newer legal forms that are kind of hybrids, like community interest companies, CICs, or those low-profit limited liability companies, L3Cs, that exist in some states in the U.S.?
Yeah, those structures are designed to allow some profit distribution to investors while still pursuing a social mission. But Yunus is a bit skeptical of them. He worries that even the possibility of dividends can create the wrong incentives. It can tempt people to prioritize profits over impact.
So his ideal is a clean break, no dividends, no personal profit, just a pure focus on the social mission.
Exactly. And he sees a lot of value in ownership, even if it doesn't come with personal financial rewards.
Why is that? What's so important about ownership if you're not going to get rich from it?
He believes that owning a social business, even without the prospect of getting rich, gives people a sense of pride, a deeper level of involvement, and it creates the potential for, like, a family legacy. He talks about families being proud of their ancestors who built successful social businesses, carrying on that tradition of doing good in the world.
Yeah.
The powerful idea. It's different from being involved in a nonprofit, where your role is often limited to donating money or serving on a board.
Right. It's about building something that's yours, something that will hopefully outlast you and continue to benefit others for generations to come. And this whole social business movement isn't happening in a vacuum, is it? There are organizations and institutions that are supporting its growth.
Absolutely. There's a whole ecosystem developing around this. The Yunus Center in Dhaka, Bangladesh, is kind of like the mothership for all things social business. It's a place where people can connect, share ideas, get support, find resources.
And there are other key players, right?
Yeah, the Grameen Creative Lab, GCL, which is based in Germany, has been really instrumental in spreading the word about social business and helping to get new initiatives off the ground. They've developed the 7 principles of social business, which are kind of like guidelines for anyone who wants to start a social business.
Right. And we should mention that academic institutions are also playing a bigger role in all of this.
Definitely. More and more universities are offering courses on social business, and some are even setting up dedicated research centers. There are some cool partnerships happening too, like Glasgow Caledonian University have the Grameen Caledonian Nursing College, which is focused on training nurses using social business principles, and Kyushu University in Japan is working with Grameen on various tech projects aimed at helping rural communities in Bangladesh.
It's really becoming a legitimate field of study, which is great to see. Now, I think it's important to acknowledge that the ultimate goal here, the thing that really drives Yunus, is incredibly ambitious. He wants to use social business to end poverty, like completely eradicate it.
Yeah, it's a huge, audacious goal. But he truly believes it's possible. And he argues that, the traditional capitalist system just hasn't delivered on that promise. Sure, it's brought prosperity to some parts of the world, but it's left billions behind. And the problems are only getting worse with things like climate change and all the social and economic upheaval that comes with it.
Right. And he's not saying that we should just scrap capitalism altogether, is he?
No, he doesn't think that's realistic or even desirable. His point is that we need to fundamentally change how we do capitalism. We need to bring in this element of social purpose to make sure that the benefits of economic growth are shared more widely and sustainably.
He's saying that we already have the resources, the knowledge, the technology to solve a lot of these problems. We just
Yeah.
need to apply them differently.
Exactly. And he makes this really powerful point that, poverty hurts everyone, not just the poor. When people are trapped in poverty, we lose out on all their potential contributions to society.
Right. It's like this massive waste of human potential.
Exactly. And he pushes back against this very common idea that the rich have to exist at the expense of the poor. Like, there's only a limited amount of wealth to go around.
The whole, like, pie metaphor.
Exactly. He says that's just not true. We can create more wealth, more opportunity, without leaving anyone behind. And he also criticizes the trickle-down theory, the idea that if the wealthy get wealthier, it'll eventually benefit everyone. He thinks that's a very slow and unreliable way to address poverty.
Right. It's not really trickling down very effectively, is it?
Not really.
Yeah.
So what he's advocating for is a more proactive approach. Don't just wait for things to get better. Actively design a system that's fairer, more equitable, and more focused on solving the problems that are holding us back as a species.
It's a pretty radical idea, but I find it incredibly hopeful.
Me too. So for those of you listening, I hope you're walking away with a clear understanding of what social business is all about. It's a self-sustaining business model that's designed to solve social problems. It's not charity, it's not CSR, it's something entirely different. And the profits are reinvested in the mission, not in someone's bank account.
Right. And the big takeaway here, the aha moment, is that we can actually use the power of business to make a real difference in the world. We can tackle poverty, hunger, disease, environmental degradation, all sorts of things if we change how we think about business itself. We can tap into both our self-interest, wanting to build something successful, and our desire to do good, to make a positive impact.
Totally. And what's exciting is that there are already so many incredible examples out there to learn from. So, do some research, check out the Yunus Center website, see what's happening in your own community, and maybe even start thinking about how you could apply these principles to your own passions, your own work.
Exactly. And I think the most important question we can leave you with is this. If we acknowledge that humans are driven by more than just money, how much could we achieve if we really embrace this idea of social business? What kind of world could we create?
I think that's a great place to leave it. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
And we'll see you next time.